Welcome to another video by Galactic Collector, where today we're going to take a look at the vintage Radio Controlled Jawa Sandcrawler and how to break it down and put it back together. Now, we do offer on our eBay store some replacement parts for the Sandcrawler if you need them. Make sure to check that out. So, taking a look at the Sandcrawler, there's really not too much you need to take it apart. One, you need a screwdriver, and two, you need a place to put the screws. You don't want to lose them. There's a number of them, so this is handy. This is one of those magnetic screws holders, so I like to have that on hand to toss those into. So taking a look here, we've got our front door. We've got a couple of top panels up here. We've got our front canopy. So these are replacement panels that we do have. They don't serve much of a purpose, but they do get lost. We've got our elevator and some treads down here. Now the elevator, you see it clicks into place by this little tab that holds it up. So we can pull that out here at this point. So you can see on the front, we've got the front hatch or front canopy. Open that up and you can see into the cockpit area here. This guy's missing all his stickers. And that's what she looks like from the undercarriage. And we can open the door up here, and we can see the battery cover, and that just slides out of the way and slides back into place. Now to continue breaking it down here, we got to take these screws out. We've got 6 on the bottom, so 3 there, then 3 just opposite on the other side. And so, now one thing to point out here, this has some pretty narrow slots for the screws that the screws go into, so you're going to need a more narrow bit to get those screws out. So I like to use this power screwdriver. It just makes things a little quicker. And nobody wants to watch somebody take screws out in real time, so we're going to speed this up and buzz through this to see what that looks like as we get through there. So there we go. We can now separate the top and the bottom into the 2 halves. Now, if you just needed to replace the battery cover at this point, here's where that goes in. You see it just kind of slides on these rails here. It's got these 2 little guides that hold it in place in between those rails, and it slides back and forth there. So you could swap that out and put this puppy back together at this point if that's all you needed to do. Now, just a quick note on the wiring here. This is something, I have good intentions to kind of redo the remote control mechanism on here. All the original wiring is still in here, but pay no attention to what you see going on behind the scenes on that wiring there. So let's take a look at this top portion here. To get the door off, it's held in place. Now, if you have a vintage door, it's held to this floor portion on the inside by a little plastic hinge, and that floor unit is held in by 2 screws. So let's go ahead and pull that out, and we can get the door off, just like that. Now I just want to point out real quick on here the antenna. So you will see a piece of metal that wraps around and connects onto the bottom here. You see it stick out and kind of connect to these 2 of these screw connectors on the bottom. But if you look in here, you can see it kind of wraps around the ceiling and comes out to the side here and the side here. And that rounded portion there by the screw will actually make contact with this little brass contact section. So when those go back together, that sits on there, the screw holds tension in there, and that's how the antenna works on the Sandcrawler. So to get this front part off, there's 5 screws we got to take out. So there's 2, you can kind of see them in there in the cockpit area, and then there's these 3 on the bottom. These screws are a little different than some of the other ones. They're a little slightly flatter, wider pan head, so that's how you can tell them apart. But we can get these apart. Now there's a couple of ways you can tackle this. I like to take the front part off first before I separate the top from the base, but it's all a matter of preference. So that front portion is off, and here you can kind of see how these flat heads are and how they compare to the other screws on the Sandcrawler. So next up, we need to separate this top section from the little base here. And really, it's only held together with tabs. So we could have separated this first before we did the that front portion, but it really doesn't matter which order you go in on those. So it comes apart fairly easy, and there you can see that antenna better there. And you don't really need to take the antenna out. I mean, if you're going to do a deep clean on here, you could at this point. This basically just slides out from this side, and then you can push it up and over that post and kind of pull it out from the other side. But like I said, there's no need to take it apart at this point. And so from here we can take a look at that canopy top hatch door here. So you can see there's some slots in this bottom portion here. So what we want to do is aim this straight down, and you're going to pull it down a little bit. You'll see there's a little extra catch in there where it kind of curls back at the very end of the hinge. So you want to get that all the way down on both sides, and then you can just rotate it out and it will come right out. Okay, now for the fun part. We're going to get these treads off. So to get the treads off, we've got 12 screws we've got to take out, 3 for each of the treads, and some of them are hidden underneath the circuitry here, some of them under wiring. You can access all of them fairly easily, and those screws go into the treads there. The treads are also connected by these pegs here to the front wheel assembly and the rear wheel assembly. Now you have to get those out as well to replace the treads or kind of do any work on those. So we'll do a little high-speed screw removal here to get us to the next step. So while we're here, let's take a look at this rear drive wheel assembly here. You can see it's held in place here. It's got 4 tabs, 2 on each side. So there's one tab, kind of this little connector down by the motor. There's this one over here, a little hard to see, but it's in that corner there. And these are the easy ones, 2 on this side here. I get the screws on this last tread. We have to get this screw out of the circuit board, which will take a smaller screwdriver. So we'll get that open, get those hidden screws in there out of the way. And then we get the last 3 screws here, and we will have all of the tread screws out. Now the front assembly is the easier assembly to take out. It will pretty much come right out with a little bit of pressure. Now it is held in, this front wheel section is held in with a number of pegs into the bottom, and you can see some are broken off in my case here. So that makes it even easier. But we get that apart, and we can take a look now at these treads. You can just see there's a couple of pegs and some holes for them to go in on either tread. That helps keep everything in alignment. And there's a couple of screws holding in a little guide bar that the front wheel can pivot on when it goes backwards. Now we get to the most challenging part. So I like to use these little plastic razor blades because I can cut them in half and use them as shims to get under those tabs that are holding the rear assembly in. I also like to have a little nylon pry bar, and I've got this guy here just in case, but this will take some patience. Let's start on this side. I'll take one of my shims and I'll jam it under the middle section here, and that will release these tabs on this side. Now it's pretty tight in there, and do be careful, even though it's a plastic razor, it's still pretty sharp. Now for the other side, I've got one shim wedged in down near the motor, and for this tab that's kind of in this inner recess corner, I find it actually better to put a shim in from underneath the Sandcrawler to kind of push that unit out away from the plastic from here. It's just a little easier. It seems to work a little bit better. There's no real easy way, but that seems to be the best way that I've found. From here, it now just takes patience and a little pressure. You want to not force it, but things are loose now. Those tabs are released, so I can start wiggling it out. as the tabs are released, you can pull the shims out, and you can kind of keep wiggling it, and with a little persistence, it will come out. I still have the shim holding it in place there. There we go. And you can see here, one of the pegs actually broke off on this original side. I'll do a repair on that before I put it back together. It does take some abuse. There's no guarantee that any glue I put on there will hold it. But there we go. So here's our rear drive assembly. The wheels, they just simply come apart. The plastic can be on that axle pretty tightly, but if you pull hard enough, it will pull out. This is one of my replacement wheels that I have available on my eBay store. But yeah, to really pull the wheels off and get to the motor assembly, the motor assembly just got 3 screws holding it in place here. So we can get those out and take a quick look in there. So let's get these wheels off and take a look at that. Now, you hopefully don't need to get in here for too much, but if you needed, let's say the motor wasn't working at all, you could open this up and get in there and turn that motor, put some oil in there. Maybe you might need to lubricate the gears, but really it's just a gearbox. Not a lot that can go wrong in there other than the motor not working or things being broken. So let's take a look at the screws that we have. We got our 6 connectors for the bottom, we got 2 for the door, we've got our 12 for the treads, we've got 3 for the motor, 1 for the circuit board, and the 5 for holding the front part of that Sandcrawler on. So now for the repairs that I do, I like this plastic weld. I also like just Harbor Freight's super glue gel. So I'm going to take any parts that were broken or beat up or maybe need a little reinforcement, put some glue on there, let them set for the appropriate amount of time. So our Sandcrawler has been completely disassembled at this point. So go ahead, do a deep clean, take care of the parts that need some repair, and then we can start putting it back together. So this is really just a reverse of everything that we just went through. We're going to put the 3 screws back together on the motor housing. And we're going to put the axle back in place, put the other wheel back in place. Now, I've got a original rear and here's a comparison between a rear original tread and a front original tread. You can see that extra little peg hole there that basically is holding the rear drive tire in place. The front doesn't have that. So the replacement treads that I have are basically meant to be interchangeable between the front or back. So it has the drive tire little slot in there as well. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to take and put my replacement tread on the rear side where the elevator is, and I'll put my good original one, well, not that my replacement's a bad one, but the original one will go on the front side where the door opens, where I'll have a little display set up. So I'm going to align the pegs into the holes there for the first tread, then I'm going to do it for the other tread. Now the trick is to align all 6 of the pegs for the treads into their appropriate holes while aligning that rear motor assembly back into its location as well. So just kind of work your way around there slowly, don't force anything, get things lined up for the motor, and just keep double checking each side to make sure you have good alignment. And when you're feeling good about it, you can go ahead and squeeze everything into place and that'll snap right in. Now at this point you want to make sure you meant to do that because you just saw how difficult it was to get that apart. So that's in there pretty solid. Now let's go ahead and do the front wheel assembly. Now the key thing here, it works pretty much the same way as the rear. We've got the pegs. I'm going to take my replacement and put it on the back side. Again, just because I do have an original one for the front as well. So here's my original one. And when you're putting this back in, one of the key things is to make sure the wheel stays in the slot that it has. So you can see this kind of popped off here. I want to realign that and really hold it in place. Basically hold it completely vertical as you're putting it back together, and gravity will hold it in place. And we're going to just align everything back up in here and push things into place, and we should be set there. And we want to double check that front wheel. We want to make sure it moves, that it didn't get caught up in there. It's still in the slot that it's supposed to be in, and that's looking pretty good. So we can start putting some screws back in place now. As we get the last screw in, let's check everything out, make sure everything's in good alignment, everything's nice and tight, all our wheels still work. Let's get our wiring out of our way, and let's get our door back in place. So basically that goes in fairly easy. You're going to kind of hook the one side in and then straighten it out so it slides straight down in, and reversing basically what we did to take it out. You can take a little force, don't go too hard on it because you can break those tabs off. And the canopy door is back on, hatchway, whatever you'd like to call it. So now I'll stick the front part back on here. So we've got our flat pan head screws, the larger, wider pan heads. So we'll put the two screws in up in the cockpit area. And then we'll put the 3 in on the bottom. And again, notice when I'm using this power screwdriver, I don't power it all the way down. I get most of the way down. When it starts getting a little tight, then I'll start turning that by hand. It's just to avoid over-torquing these screws. That's looking nice and tight. So next up, we can snap our top onto the base here. And again, this just has the tabs. One of the hardest things is getting that antenna aligned back in there. The best way to do that is really just put it in a little closer, and then you can reach in the doorway and just kind of grab it by hand and get it in alignment, and then slide it in place, and then get the tabs. It's best to start with the rear tabs, and then work your way around until they all sit in place. Of course, sometimes they will fight you, but eventually they will submit and your Sandcrawler parts will be back together. There we go. So the top portion is now reassembled. Everything's looking pretty tight. Looks like we have pretty decent alignment. Now we've got the door. So the door has these two posts that will go into that floor portion there. So sit that down flush, and we can then put the screws back in that hold that in place. Again, if you're using our replacement doors on here, it's really important you don't over torque that because you can't snap those posts. It's okay if you do hear some cracking. It is kind of designed to partially separate in there, but it will lodge and friction will hold it in place. But again, you don't want to over tighten things. So there we go, our door is in place and functional. So we're about ready to put our top and bottom parts back together. And to do that, first we want to take a look at our battery. Again, make sure that battery cover is in place before you get that top in there. Otherwise, because of how it rides on those rails, you can't put it in. It's not flexible enough really to get that in without taking it apart. So the top basically just sits in a little bit there. There's kind of a little groove that sits down in, but make sure it gets aligned. And then we've got our 6 screws to put back in, and we're almost done. So while we've got it upside down here, we can go ahead and pop the elevator back in. And you can see it clicks right in there with that tab that holds it up. And now our Sandcrawler is completely back together. So we can just take another quick look over this guy here, make sure everything looks good. Everything's in alignment, the door is working properly. You can see we got our elevator is ready to drop down and pick up some droids and then bring them back up. And we are all set. So other than the wiring, that is everything you ever wanted to know about the vintage Star Wars radio controlled Jawa Sandcrawler and how to take it apart and put it back together. Make sure to visit galacticcollector.com to learn more about your vintage Star Wars action figure collection, and make sure to visit our eBay store if you need any of the parts that you saw in this show. Thanks for watching.